Alright, this is going to be a video about my journey through photography as a hobby and things I've learned along the way and more about my relationship with the hobby or with the my interest in photography and where I draw inspiration and enjoyment from and conclusions I've come to. One of the biggest things I realized after reflecting on this is that it's really not about the gear. Some of my favorite pictures, actually my very favorite picture I've ever taken was with a film camera that I got for free. So, and here you see in front of you thousands of dollars worth of gear. There's a Canon R5 there behind this RF 100 to 400 zoom lens, Sigma art, the EF 70 to 200 USM Mark II, and here you see the 24 to 70 EF L lens, and then I have a nifty 50, and I'm going to get to why you see the nifty 50 attached to the R5 right now, in spite of it being up against few $1,000s worth of lenses onto its left. But just going through, I'm glad I made this video as I was able to list out all of the gear that I've used over the years, which pictures, reflecting on which pictures I've taken that were my most memorable, most favorite, in my opinion, some of my best photographs, and learned where I draw inspiration from, what I find enjoyable. It is hobby for me, so it's some degree of self-expression, and what's challenged me and what's helped my skills. So I kind of just wanted to touch base on all those aspects of my journey through photography as a hobby. So I was always intrigued by the concept or the idea of picture taking or taking pictures, and a very first camera my parents ever had was a Yashica film camera rangefinder. I was super young when my dad had that. I took a handful of pictures on that, having to align the focal distance. My dad's not really into photography, but he used it to take pictures. And then the one that really intrigued me was we had the Sony Mavica. I don't know if you remember those cameras. They took floppy disks. I just found it super interesting that you could take pictures and delete them and take more and upload them to a computer. That was interesting. And then the first camera that I actually got that was my own was a Kodak 2.4 or 2.3 megapixel digital camera, and man, it took 2 AA batteries, and I used that as much as I possibly could. I didn't take too many memorable shots on that. It was more of a point and shoot. I didn't get into the nitty gritty of understanding how to use manual mode, or I don't even remember if it had manual mode settings. Anyways, the time where I really got serious into photography is after that was in high school. And then I went off onto college, and college was where I really got into photography because my roommate, he was really into photography, and he taught me quite a bit. He'd develop his own film, and he would shoot medium format as well. So I happened to, someone was giving away a FSLR for free, because this was the time digital cameras were really taking over. People were really getting rid of all of their film gear. So I happened to inherit an Olympus OM-2. Years later, I actually ended up getting as well a Canon AE1, but it's the Olympus OM-2 that I really learned photography on, and shot my favorite a couple of my favorite pictures, and one of my best ones that to date, I believe. Maybe it's near and dear to my heart and has some emotional attachment to it, but one of my favorite pictures I've ever shot was with that Olympus OM-2. And so along with the body, I can't remember who gave it to me, but I also got a Zucchio 50 millimeter prime 1.8, that lens, and that also got I think it was a 35 to 200 millimeter zoom lens. And I also got, I think, if I remember correctly, 5 to 7 rolls of unused film, and some of those being in black and white. It was a black and white 400 TX film. I still have the negatives of. Anyhow, it was that camera paired with the Zucchio lens I would take around with me. I was a super broke, poor college student, but my roommate, he was already working at the time, and we would go out and do photography together, and he taught me everything about aperture, sizes. I remember at this point I didn't know anything, ISO or sensitivity, and he also taught me about shutter speed and basically the basics of how a camera works. I was a fast learner, and of course it was of interest to me, and I had this new gear I got for free. So the first roll or two of film, I had poor results. I mean, I was totally just learning. And then I went to develop those 2 rolls of film, and I remember it costing money. And I can't remember how many shots. I think you get like 30 shots, or yeah, about 20 to 30 shots off of 1 roll of film or something like that. And so I got it down to what the cost of the roll of film would be and how much it would cost to develop. And I basically figured out exactly how much it would cost to shoot every time I released a shutter. What would the cost to be because again, I was a broke college student. But the reason I include this in my journey of photography, because it absolutely taught me how to be patient with composure, patient with composition. Make sure the pictures I'm taking are framed appropriately, taking my time, making sure my focus was right, because the Zucchio lens I was using was also a manual focus. I believe it was manual aperture and manual focus, so it was very tactile, and you had to really gauge the distance, know which ring did what, and be quick, because I would do some street photography as well. Not everything was just standstill portraits. And so it really trained you to not just spray, just think and shoot. I mean, we're so spoiled now with the R6 Mark II will shoot 40 frames per second electronic shutter. That's insane. There's no the amount of forethought that's not needed, along with this autofocus system. Even this R5 autofocus system is immense. I mean, there are not even manual controls on these lenses anymore, on this nifty 50 you see. So what that did teach me, though, is how to work with all the settings and really think quick on your feet and get locked onto your subject. And so I learned a lot of skills through the necessity of having them. And one thing that also does stand out is the size of the Zucchio lens, because you'll see as we go through these cameras I've had and where I draw inspiration, and what I like to shoot with as a hobbyist is what gets me behind the camera more often. I think that's where a lot of my inspiration is drawn, is the camera doesn't get in the way of the photography. And what I mean by that is it's not bulky to carry around, and that's why you see this 50 millimeter prime here. I will take this camera more often and do more photography and get more shots with this lens than I will with any of these just because it's small, it's compact. If I'm going hiking, if I'm going out, I have no problem picking this up and throwing it in my backpack or taking it with me because of its size and weight. The moment I attach any one of these lenses, it becomes burden and it becomes questionable. Oh, should I bring it with me or not? Now I'm going to go through all the cameras I've been through and how I came to that conclusion. And I noticed again, because it's this Canon R5 body that really brought me back into the hobby. Most specifically, also coupled with this 50mm lens. Even though that's a $170 lens, it's on a close to $3,000 or $4,000 body, which is not the appropriate match. But I mean, it really brought me back to the hobby, and I'll explain why. So that was my first lens I shot with, was that Zukio 50mm on the Olympus OM-2. Fantastic setup. I've since sold it or got rid of it, and I kind of wish I didn't, but it's gone. I still have the photos from it, and that I enjoy viewing. So after that camera, my brother gave me a Lumix point and shoot. However, it was super small, probably about the size of like a cell phone, just thicker. But it did have all the manual settings on there. You could go into the menus, and since I knew how to use those, I would shoot manual mode. Occasionally auto, but I'd shoot manual mode, take some great low light pictures, and I drew a lot of inspiration from that. I took some more of my favorite pictures with that camera, just because of the fact I would have it on my person when I was out and about and doing different things, and it wasn't cumbersome to use. Sure, it had a built-in lens. Sure, it was a point and shoot, but it was easy to take around with me. And so I have great pictures with that camera as well. And I also shot in manual mode with the camera, but largely because this form factor is easy to take with. And the next camera I got after that was this Canon 60D. And that, after the Canon R5 you see here, that was my favorite camera. It was my first full-size DSLR with semi-professional camera. Of course, it's like prosumer, consumer grade, but the 60D was a nice camera. And the body had an excellent sensor, and I think it was an 18.1 megapixel sensor. And coming from the Lumix point and shoot and the Canon the Olympus film camera, I mean, you can just imagine, this is like worlds of difference. The quality of pictures it was taken, and I shot a lot with that camera. And the main lens I used after those EFS kit lenses was the EF 50mm, and of course it was a crop sensor, so I think it was focal length was about maybe 70 or something like that. But anyways, it was the EF 50mm lens on the crop sensor. But man, I shot with that, and I drew a lot of inspiration. It was a pretty compact size. I think it was roughly about the footprint of this. But I used it a lot. The next body I ended up getting was a 6D Mark II. I think that was obviously full frame. I remember not enjoying shooting with that camera. But that also coincided during the time when I ended up having more funds and money. And so at the time I had owned the 6D Mark II, I actually purchased this lens. I also had the Nifty 50, which I think I shot the most of my pictures on, but I have this lens. It was the Sigma Art 50mm and a 1.4, and then I bought this lens, and I also bought this lens. So these three lenses I bought when I owned my 6D Mark II. And I think at the time this glass was very expensive. Obviously, it's like, what is this, about close to $5,000 worth of glass, 4,500. Anyways, I felt very compelled to use the expensive glass I had on my 6D Mark II, because that also for me was very pricey body at the time. Still is pretty expensive. Anyways, so I would naturally always have if ever I ever wanted to shoot a 50mm prime focal length, I would put the Sigma Art on there as opposed to the Nifty 50, but I would just take it out a lot less often. And having spent all the money on this glass, I probably didn't take my camera out as much, and anytime I did take it out, it'd be a little bit cumbersome, a little bit clunky, just because of the sheer size of the glass. And and I felt bad about using the 6D Mark II with the Nifty 50. I still had the EF Nifty 50 at that time because I felt, compelled to use the nicer, more expensive glass. My logic was, why would I take the Nifty 50? Why would I take a $120 lens when I have an $800 state-of-the-art, close to Zeiss Otis Performance Sigma Art lens? And so, but what ended up happening is I kind of didn't take the camera out as often because of the sheer size and how cumbersome and how difficult it was. So I lost a little bit of enjoyment. I wasn't creating as much. The camera and the lens system got in the way of like my inspiration or my love of shooting. To such an extent, I actually, while owning the 6D Mark II, I purchased the Canon M3. And I bought the 20mm prime pancake lens for it. And I would actually take that one out more often. I'd get great pictures with it. I really didn't like the distortion of the 20mm focal length. I just didn't like how it drew the pictures compared to the 50mm focal length. In addition, the M3 body, I thought its compared to other cameras, I thought its focusing system was great, but it was very, very clunky to shoot with because it didn't have all the controls on there. The sensor was fantastic. The sensor was fantastic on that Canon M3. The sensor is 24 megapixel crop sensor, but the size of that camera was just so compact. For I thought it was amazing. 24.2 megapixel crop sensor, and it also had an adapter so I could adapt the EF lenses to the I think it's an EF-M mount. But again, the moment I would put one of these lenses on there, I ran into the same problem. The whole package, the whole shooting experience became kind of clunky. So I shot that Canon M3 with the 22mm focal length I really didn't care for. And also the ergonomics of the camera were not the best. There's no viewfinder. You had to look at this composition through the screen, changing manual settings. Sometimes you had to go into menus. They weren't as intuitive and easily accessible to change. The ISO, the shutter speed, and the aperture. So I found that a little clunky. What I eventually ended up doing is once the Canon R5 came out, actually the R6 and the R5, I look at some of the videos, I look at some of the reviews, I saw the form factor, how compact it was for a mirrorless setup. And even though at this point, before I purchased the R5, I kind of, felt uninspired. I didn't enjoy the hobby as much, largely because I found myself not taking the nice glass out. Anyway, so then I bought the R5, and this is where it really drew me back into the hobby. So once I got this Canon Nifty 50 native RF mount lens coupled with this body, I take this camera with me. I wouldn't say everywhere, but I take it with me so often. And this is a very small lens. The battery life coupled with this lens lasts forever. And this 45 megapixel sensor is immense. But more so than even the sensor or the gear, it has to, for me, what I'm realizing, it has to do with the compactness of the package, the focal length I'm shooting at, and the fact that I can take it and just go. And so this effectively replicates my first love with photography setup. Basically a full frame sensor with a 50 millimeter fixed focal length. And that's exactly what I shot with that Olympus OM. It was a full frame or 35 millimeter film with a 50 millimeter fixed focal length, so 50 millimeter prime. And the way this camera, so not only the size and the package, easy to take with, also other things that are great about this that's really rekindled my interest in photography is also the speed with the autofocus, the dynamic range, the way that this camera draws the colors, the way this camera sensors draws colors, I think is amazing. Now, believe it or not, I've not felt compelled to replace any of this glass with native RF glass. 1, because I'm a hobbyist. 2, it's super expensive. 3, this glass is still, in my opinion, close to perfect or fantastic. And I'll adapt any of these with the RF to EF mount. And so what was really brought my interest and inspiration back to the hobby and back to photography, really, I have to give credit to this nifty 50. I love shooting in this 50 millimeter focal length. I love that it gives me a compact package. And what I also love is that with this RF50, they've really upped the game on the optical quality of the lens. Compared to the old EF Nifty 50, I feel like this is faster, sharper, and shoots a little bit better with ease. And obviously, I'm mounting it on a R5, so there's a lot to do with that. But it's a focal length I'm really comfortable with, and I like the size. And I take my camera out with me more often. Though these large lenses aren't bulky, they don't get in the way of my shooting experience. It also forces me to be a little bit more creative and move with my camera. I think that's also important. It's a prime lens, so there are limitations to ability to zoom, but what you get in return is a lot of creativity in terms of having to move to frame your subject properly, to compose your picture properly. And also, at such a low weight and cost, you get the 1.8 aperture, which is fantastic. I mean, if it was 1.2, would that be even better? Absolutely. But 1.8 for $170 in this small of a lightweight package with the quality of the images. I mean, they're not absolutely tack sharp like I can get out of my art. But the picture is not always about it being perfectly tack sharp, perfectly optically perfect. Like I said, one of my favorite pictures I've taken was with that Olympus OM-2 with film. And if you look really closely, it looks a little grainy and spotty and splotchy. It's not tack sharp, but just the picture I took with it, the composition, the location I was at, how it drew the picture in black and white, the way the lens, added some of its own character to some of the, bokeh behind it. It was just fantastic, and I get a lot of inspiration out of that, as I do with this 50 millimeter lens. I've compared the picture out of this 50 millimeters and this Sigma Art lens, and of course the Art lens. Its colors are a touch better. This is pretty close, in my opinion, to optically perfect. With that said, unless I'm really comparing them side by side, I'm more interested in the subject I've shot, the picture I've taken, and this gets me the quality I need or I want out of anything I shoot. The quality here is better, without a doubt, with any of these lenses. But this one gets me to where it's absolutely more than acceptable in quality. I'm not doing this for professional work. I'm doing this for hobby. So I'm more interested in capturing interesting things I see, shooting for the enjoyment, and you know, working with the camera in different settings, and there's some degree of his skill. And you know, also there's just enough challenge to work with a prime lens, so you have to move around, try to compose your shot, keep in mind where are you, where's the subject, where's the light coming from. It forces you to move a little bit, and I think sometimes that makes for a better picture, because you know, if you're already in motion, you're taking a few steps, you'll take the extra 4 or 5 steps, as opposed to this. These lenses, they're fantastic. You can just easily zoom back and forth. It keeps you put a little bit more. So I draw a lot of inspiration from these lightweight prime lenses, and it allows me to, is rekindled my interest in the hobby, adds a little bit more challenge, keeps my skills up, and has really drawn me to it. And so what I'm realizing, it's definitely not about the gear. Don't let the gear get in the way, because it can, and it does. I mean, then I'm talking about it from a hobbyist perspective, not necessarily professional. And with that said, if I feel like I want to shoot birds or wildlife, that's why I purchased this 100 to 400 native RF zoom. I'll use this for family portraits or kids playing outside. And this, if I really want some optically perfect pictures, and this is most like workhorse general purpose, just going to events, you know, just using that as when I know I need to take a camera for a dedicated purpose, not just grab and go and see not necessarily, I have a purpose to shoot and I want to make sure I get good compositions, I'll take this one. But if it's somewhere where I'm on the fence, I want to I may or may not want to take a camera, I maybe don't need to, it'll go with me with this lightweight lens on, especially if I'm hiking or just biking around or something, just for fun. I'll take it with this. And so long story short, this is a long drawn out video, or narrative, I guess, but don't let the gear get in the way, because it can, and it can also help you fall out of interest with, you know, photography. And everybody's interests are different. And if it doesn't get in there, absolutely do it. But this is just my personal story and what I'm realizing as I reflect. Again, don't get caught. Just if you're doing it for fun, don't let the gear get in the way. Don't get caught up in the gear, and you can still take some of the best shots and with you know, old tech. You know, my Olympus OM-2 took some of my best pictures. And as I went through all these, and I really enjoyed shooting on that 60D. I do not enjoy shooting on this R5, and sometimes I have, believe it or not, toyed with the idea of going and getting a Canon T2i on a super budget and just doing like a budget photography session and seeing what kind of results I get from a couple $100 camera. I don't know what those go for used now, maybe $200-300. No, it couldn't be 300. A couple $100, $100, and see what kind of results I get, because that was a super lightweight compact body. I actually purchased that for my dad for a trip he was taking just for fun, and I just remember being amazed that I believe it had the same sensor, the 18.1 megapixel sensor as the 60D, if I'm not mistaken. And just thinking that, man, this will take the same quality pictures of my 60D in such a small footprint, super lightweight. Of course, it wasn't professional grade. It had not as fast of a shutter frames per second, but I mean, none of that mattered for, you know, hobbyist photography. Anyways, there's my thoughts on, you know, photography and the journey I went through and what I've settled on, what I've ended up. Now, am I going to get rid of any of these lenses? Absolutely not, because I still use them. They're fun. But if I could only take one lens
it would probably still be this one. But I mean, with that said, this is a $170 lens, so it's ridiculous. I would, no matter what lineup of lenses I ever have, I'll always want to have this nifty 50 just because of the how lightweight it is, the creativity it affords me by being able to take it wherever I go, and the inspiration I get out of it. I really like that 50 millimeter focal length. I like that it's lightweight, and I like that it allows me to take the camera more often than I would otherwise. Okay, thanks for watching. Hope you gained out of it. Please share comments if you found where and how you find inspiration in photography. Do share. Thanks.